My role as a COO is essentially to look after a number of the core functions of the business. So those are, for an e-commerce company, that typically involves the movement of goods around our supply chain. Historically, I've also looked after merchandising, which is basically selection of product, and I've also looked after at various points in my career at the company, finance and people.
Awesome. And how did you use Fellow to do all those things? Can you tell us a little bit about how you first got to learn about Fellow and how it became a part of your workflow?
Yeah, sure. So I was looking for something that would enable me and the company to be more organized with meeting agendas, both in terms of having something that as we went through our week and thought of things that should be discussed in a forum, make sure we could have somewhere to log and track those. So when we came to one-on-ones and group meetings, we were more prepared and people remembered what they wanted to talk about, but also then tracking the actions that came out of particular meetings and making sure everyone was delivering, because I've just found a lot in my career that people don't often write things down when they say they're going to do things, and people forget to do things, and it's also easy to forget what you've asked people to do. So those are the two things I was trying to solve.
That's great. And this show or this series is called The Art of the Meeting. So I wanted to ask you about one recurring meeting that you run in Fellow as a COO there. So what was your favorite meeting to run in Fellow?
So we have our weekly executive meeting. It's something we ran out of Fellow. So that was definitely a favorite. We were always, pre-Fellow, we were pretty unstructured in that meeting. We would often come in and just and not be organized in what we wanted to talk about, and therefore not achieve much. So that was a favorite. But I also just think the one-on-ones were my favorites. Like, before I was using Fellow, I'd often come to one-on-ones and it was a case of like, oh, hey, how's everything going? Oh, good, blah, blah. And it was just sort of a very loose conversation. But, post using Fellow, I was certainly able to get through more tangible outcomes. So there's a couple of things for you.
Okay, let's talk about those two meetings, starting with the executive meeting. Do you remember what the agenda was for that meeting? Can you walk us through each section of that note?
Yeah, we didn't necessarily cut it into sections. So we would just, there's among the management team, there's a lot of key things to be discussed each week. So it was just, we weren't necessarily using the full power of Fellow there. It was just making sure that we would come organized and that each member of the management team, as they thought of something during the week, could go to Fellow, log it, and make sure that when we turned up to the meeting, we had stuff to talk about. I think if we take the sort of the one-on-ones, the sections that I would typically focus on is I'd have like key projects you're working on, and with each staff member I'd walk through, what are the 3 to 4 key things they're working on and make sure we had updates on those. Then it would be some outstanding tasks that had to be done that we talked about. So they maybe didn't slot in the larger project, but they were just an outstanding action. And then the last thing was just a kind of a free anything else you want to discuss. So those are the 3 sections that I used to run one-on-ones.
And as the COO there, would you then encourage other managers in the company to use a similar template, or would managers in the company choose their own?
Managers in the company would choose their own. I think with a tool like Fellow or most tools, you want to make sure you're getting adoption, and adoption means you need to give people freedom to use it in the way they want to use it, however works for them. If you try to enforce a way of using something on people that doesn't work for them, your adoption is going to drop, in my experience.
Okay, so I want to talk about why this specific template worked for you, just to give some insight to other leaders who might be interested in improving their one-on-ones. So why did you start with key projects? Let's start with that.
Because I knew that those were the things I wanted regular updates on, and if I didn't make sure I was asking about those same things every week, it would be easy for things to slip through the cracks. So that's that section of the meeting. You had the headline, major projects being worked on, and then the 3 to 4 bullets under that would stay the same for weeks on end, because I just wanted to make sure we were getting regular updates on that. It also made sure that the team member was still focused on delivering those things, that, if they knew we were going to be talking about it every week, their focus would increase. If I've found in the past that as I said earlier, people often don't write down actions that you've asked them to take. And this could have, this section, sometimes I have outstanding tasks, sometimes I would just use the action items section from the previous week. But if I knew that if the action wasn't written down, I would forget about it, and the person would forget about it. And so this was the stuff that would change every week in the meeting. It'd be a new set of things. You would look at last week's actions and say, okay, what were the things we wrote down that you were going to execute on? Let's talk about those. And then if a new thing came up that was just a one-off that didn't fit into a broader project, it would go in that action items or outstanding tasks section.
And now I'm curious about the last section, which you called the free form section. So what would people usually write in that section? What kind of talking points go there?
It might be they have a question about something that came up during the week, or they're having a challenge in dealing with a particular project or a particular person or a supplier. So it was just, ad hoc things that they might want to talk about that didn't fit into the previous two structures. So it wasn't necessarily tied to a project. It wasn't related to something that had been asked previously, but it was just something that they wanted to chat about when we got up. That's right.
So my last question, Chris, is after your one-on-ones, how did you want people or attendees to feel right after the meeting?
That's a deep question. I just wanted to make sure they felt like that nothing was outstanding, right? That they had the opportunity, that they felt in control, and they should have felt in control because we were talking about those consistent things each week, and we had ticked off actions for the previous week. So the fact that we were writing those down, going through them methodically, means people will feel more in control. That will help them feel more secure in their role and less stressed or anxious. And just, I guess, that feel like they had the opportunity to be heard, which comes from making sure that anything that they think of during the week they want to talk about, they put in their agenda.
That's amazing, and I think a great way to end it. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your template with us and your advice on one-on-ones.
No worries, it's my pleasure.